Hello, and welcome back to the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are continuing our deep dive discussion of Descender by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen. And today we are in volumes 3 and 4, otherwise known as issues 12 to 16, which is volume 3, and 17 to 21, which is volume 4. Or if you, like me, have made the mistake of reading in the deluxe edition, you are reading the final chunk of Deluxe Volume number 1 and the first chunk of Deluxe Volume number 2. So our reading experience is split across 2 oversized hardcovers. But you know what? It's still a beautiful way to look at Dustin's art. In fact,
the oversized is great.
Right. If you're here for Dustin's work, not as much for the storytelling, or you've read the story and you just want to like an art gallery piece, the deluxe editions are stunningly beautiful. But yeah, I'm having fun looking at the vault of my old reviews on Goodreads from when I first read this, because I think I was pretty down on volume 2, and volume 3 picked me up, which I, in hindsight, find strange, because this read, I liked volume 2 a lot, and volume 3 I was like, oh, another origin story.
Well, this is my I was going to ask about this here, because as we discussed back in the Zero, I think you and I came to this series when it was being published initially. We came to it at about the same time in its run, right? Like I actually went back and looked, because you can check, I went back and looked at my like receipts from like literal receipts from back then. I purchased I got these issues digitally through Comixology when it was still alive, and actually by the time you're listening to this, Comixology may be gone.
I think the app is straight up going to be gone.
It's coming to a close. Yeah. It's going to force Amazon's forcing you to use the Kindle app. But anyway, I purchased the first 16 issues at once, and I believe 17. So
was your first issue in real time? In
real time, yeah. So 1 through 16 takes us through volume 3. And volume 3, I think, yes, obviously, I mean it's called Singularities, which is, right. At the time you don't really maybe realize the meaning, but obviously it is 5 separate origin stories. On one hand, I love getting the character backstory. On the other hand, if I were reading in real time, like I can understand how that would be wildly frustrating to take a break from the narrative, because each one of those issues, only moves the actual the narrative plot, like literally moves it forward like 3 pages, like right at the end.
Yeah, it's just inches. It's a glacial crawl.
Again, I could see how in real time, if you're reading this as it comes out, how that'd be frustrating, because I know when series do this, because it's a common move, and although it's often, a lot of times it's done like towards the end of a run, like maybe when a creative team is like getting real tired, and oftentimes it's done, I think we've discussed this before, it's done when maybe the regular artist, the co-creator, needs a break because they've been working so hard. And so you'll do like the random insert story arc where, like in this case, we got 5 origin stories we want to tell. Maybe this is like late in a 45, 50 issue run.
I mean, I genuinely think the comp here is Sweet Tooth, where he did almost the same thing, but he did it in volume 5 of 6 instead of 3 of 6.
You do it at the end, and a lot of times with five different issues for an arc, you'll bring in 5 guest artists, just to mix it up, just to make it different, just to help for an arc like this, because it's almost more a scheduling thing versus like an actual. It can be a storytelling thing too.
Sure, but, I mean, it can force creativity in such a way. But
a lot of times it's just to give the artist a break. But here it comes in the 3rd arc. And obviously
strikes of intentionality, right?
It absolutely does. And I think that reads better if you're reading this either in a, some sort of completed edition, whether it's the 6 individual trades, whether it's the deluxe edition or this forthcoming compendium, if you feel like the story as you're reading it, maybe it's treading water, I think you can get past it because you can immediately pick up what comes next, you get to the end and you get these backstories are cool. What happens next? Oh, it doesn't matter. I don't need to think about it because the story just keeps going.
So I do have to say, this is a very bingeable book.
Oh, absolutely, it is.
I read each of these volumes in like just one sitting.
No,
more than an hour a piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can burn through them, and I think it works. Volume 3, I think, presents better to not just in a trade format, but in the knowing the story is complete. And again, I say that as someone who, when I reread that, reminded me, yes, I loved those stories, even though it was odd though, because you said intentionality, which I think is super key here, because it's not like this is the first time we've seen flashback. We got flashback in volume 1 and 2, in the second issue in each of those volumes, issue 2 and issue 8. Issue 2, we got Tim 21's backstory, or his memories of being created, and then first meeting Andy. And then issue 8, we got that same story from Andy's point of view, right? Him moving to the moon with his mom,
right?
Meeting Annie and all this stuff. And they had a format for that, right? It was every other page. There was the one page was your main story moving forward, progressing, and then every other page was the monochromatic memory page, right? It didn't have paneling. It was laid out differently. It was meant to feel like a memory. And so they did that for each of those characters as a way to both progress the story forward and reveal character and character history. And so it is a choice to really put your story on pause and say, we're going to tell these other 5 characters. We're going to give them, I guess the one backstory of Effie is actually Effie and Andy. So there's a bit of a cheat there, but still, the idea that we're putting the story on pause,
right?
And we're going to basically fill out the rest of our cast. You're going to learn everything about them and understand them while we just hit pause on the story. That is a choice. And I would be. I could see how, if it was a reading in real time, it's not that I wouldn't stop. I wouldn't bail on the series. I know I wouldn't do that because I'm not built like that. But I can see how it'd be like, oh God, we're doing these one shots. Okay, we got to get through them, and feel like they were treading water from the beginning. Even though that feels like a harsh criticism, it would feel like that to the reader, that we're 11 issues in and they're already
here's my comp, and so this is always my question in storytelling, and it is a question that we all understand. Jeff Lemire is my favorite, but he relies so heavily on flashbacks and scrambled timelines as a storytelling device.
Yes,
and it was basically my complaint about like the show Lost, aside from they didn't know where they were going for the end, but like even in the midst of it,
well, they did at the end. They did in the beginning because no TV
right.
No,
but at the beginning they didn't know exactly what the ending was or what the mystery. They didn't know what was in the mystery box. But it's like, that's not a complaint. I enjoyed the process. But in the seasons 3 and 4, there'd be something interesting happening on the island, but they would slow walk that story so they could cut in, each character's like story arc from pre-island times, and some of those were kind of dull. And so here's the question I always asked myself when I was watching that: if like I forget what's her name, she Ant-Man and the Wasp, Evangeline Lilly, Kate. Evangeline Lilly's backstory, Kate, her backstory in Lost, I'm like, okay, if this weren't cut in and dropped into the show I'm watching, would I watch that show about her, being a criminal, or like, wanting to murder her father-in-law or whatever it was? And would
you want would you want to watch
a show by itself? Would I watch it? And the answer was no.
The non-island story,
right? The non-island story. No. And I was like, so instead, I'm being forced to watch a show I wouldn't want to watch because they're grafting it into this thing I am willing to watch, and that's what makes it feel like filler to me. And so my question with flashbacks inherently is, would this story be worth reading if it weren't a flashback? If he were telling this story in chronological order, would these be good chapters? And there are 5 origins there. So like the Tim 22, yes, I think that's an interesting story. no matter where it dropped. That could have been issue 2. It could have been issue 1. It could be a 0 issue. It could have been like an annual something, if they were doing that. I think that's a good one-off interesting story. And you see, oh, here's what happens when an empathy bot is put in an abusive situation. That's a great one-shot concept. Telsa's origin story, we kind of were already able to intuit that from the dialogue. I felt like it was still good to see. I enjoyed the issue and the trade. Like everything worked, but it was a little nothing burger. Like it didn't show me anything that I couldn't have already surmised. Now, maybe that's unfair because I'm rereading. The Bandit origin story, that felt like a long-winded setup to say, oh, Bandit can still track the real Tim.
Yeah.
The Andy Effie origin, now this is the one where I'm really like, would this have been interesting if it weren't a flashback, if we didn't know where these two ended up? I feel like it either could have been a 5-issue series on its own where we really see the ups and downs of their relationship and like what it was like in foster care in the orphanage, and then when they started space, and then when whatever the turning point was where she first had empathy for robots and was like not cool with it, and then starting to turn him, but he starts to dig his heels in, or he's forced to do it. It's like all of that is like a story now, but here's where I'm like coming back at myself, because I'm like, but I just intuited all of that from what was on the page.
Yeah.
So is there a point then because then, if he did a 5-issue thing of that in the middle of a series, I'd say he's gilding the lily with that story.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I have all of these questions when you introduce a mechanism like flashbacks and you use it so heavily, but I don't question the end result here. So I think that's kind of where I land. I'm like, could it have been done this way? Could it have been done that way?
Hold on. What about Driller and his backstory?
That's the killer one. The Driller is the killer.
Yeah.
Because I was like, by the time you are reading this in trade or single issue, you're like, oh my God, another origin story. And it's on the monosyllabic character. But then it has the biggest twist and reveal at all. And you're like, oh, you got me. It's like, you managed to take a character I don't care about and create stakes for the character I do care about.
And so this is what hearing all that, and I get that kind of viewpoint perspective, the idea of like, well, what if these weren't told in flashback? And I agree, flashback can be a narrative crutch. Yeah. It can be a narrative crutch. And yes, I agree. Lemire loves writing that into his stories, whether it's something that he's writing and drawing on his own, whether he's working as collaborators. It's something that he likes to do because he knows part of his storytelling, I think, kind of ethos seems to be not just what happens in the story, but when you give that information to the reader, and so, Driller is a killer. Like that doesn't land if we see first off the beginning that like he was the cause of it, essentially, that that he at least he made an active choice to break through that gas pocket, as opposed to having 11 or I guess whichever number he is in volume 3, but having like, a dozen or so issues leading up to it of him just saying Driller is a killer and you having no idea about it. It's about when that's deployed. I think the same thing for Tim 22. I don't think it hits as hard because of how they've constructed the story, where we see Tim 22 in contrast to Tim 21. And I think specifically in volume 2, when Telsa, like when she refers to Tim 21 and she makes a comment of like, aren't you, you're a robot, can't you like turn down your emotional settings? And right. Tim basically like, no, I can't do that. I'm meant to be this way and connect. And then you look over at Tim 22 and you're like, well, what the hell's wrong with this guy? He feels nothing. And then so you already have an understanding of who he is now and who Tim 21 is, and as to why are these so different is what happened to Tim 22. And maybe you can put these things together or not, but the assumption or the inference, I guess, in volume 2 is that maybe he's had something done to him. This is why he doesn't feel. This is why he doesn't have that level empty. Why his emotions are so dour and quote unquote turned down because he's a robot. And then you get that that first issue of volume 3, and you're like, oh wait, no, this is a nature versus nurture argument again. The idea of what makes a robot, what makes a robot human. This idea that no, Tim 22 was exactly like Tim 21, just like Dr. Kwan said. This series of robots was all the same, but because of the way he was treated, because
and now it's an indictment on humanity.
Exactly. Yeah. In that he didn't have that, in that nothing about Tim 22's programming changed, right? Nothing in his software changed, in that or that there was nothing unique about Tim 22, and that Tim 21 would have come out the same way had he been in a different environment, because of what his interaction was with humanity. That created him, and it created his mindset. It like the perfect petri dish, right? So for when the harvesters came and the hardwired came and found him and gave him this and showed him this ideology, right, of robot, I guess, superiority or whatever it is,
right.
He was right for it. He's perfect for it. So that doesn't land if we know that from the beginning, at least the way the story's told,
right? The way it's constructed. And I guess I'm saying, like, is he making uninteresting things interesting just by playing with time? And if how do I feel about that?
Yeah, well, and
those
I
are
think,
two distinct questions.
I think that's a very fair question. To go back to something, that's a question you can ask about Lemire's works in general,
right? And I think when he misses, which I will say, there are times where I can never say he's made a bad comic, but there are times where it just doesn't land with me.
Doesn't land quite as well.
And like the dog in space one was
Primordial, which is the book he did with I was with Andrea Sorrentino, I believe. He's done a lot of work. That's the Bone Orchard Mythos, Gideon Falls, Omen Logan, Green Arrow.
And I deserved it that time, because this, like, what happens to me, I stopped pre-buying albums and music because I noticed that there's like 5 times I've been so excited. I'm like, I love this artist so much, I'm going to pre-buy an album, and I get it, and it's always a garbage album. And I always pull Lemire's work, but Primordial, I was like, oh, he's back with Sorrentino. That's so exciting. And I went to like the Cadence Comic Select, that's that sells Lemire stuff. And I bought like an exclusive Cadence variant signed by Lemire, and something else and something else. I bought like 3 things. I was like deep in Primordial stuff, and I got it. And I was like, okay, this seems like an espionage thriller thing. Yeah. And then it was really like just some small sentimental story.
I mean, it's literally dogs in space.
Right.
Well, animals in space. Yeah. No, I mean,
the first issue had all this like intrigue, like, oh, are we having a Cold War thriller here?
Yes. Cold War space race thing. Yeah. No, I'm with you there. I think that is one where, not saying you need to calibrate expectations, but it doesn't, the reliance there. I mean, that was the first thing I thought of as well. As you and I have read pretty much everything Lemire has done, and when you say one that doesn't quite work with the mechanics of flashbacks, absolutely Primordial is one that doesn't quite work. But knowing that he does a lot of work, especially with Andrea Sorrentino, the two of them do a lot of work in the horror realm, whether it's Gideon Falls or, like I said, the current Bone Orchard Mythos universe they're doing. And, so much of what Lemire and specifically when he works with Sorrentino in the horror realm does, they pull a lot from the idea of flashback and the idea of I'm going to withhold information from the reader because I'm going to drop it on them later, and it's one of the things that I think about Lemire as a kind of as a storyteller. I think it's less so when he's working on his own. Because a lot of when he writes and draws something, because that's either like a self-contained story, like maybe 4 or 5 issues, or an OGN. But when he's working with a collaborator and has multiple volumes in a story, I think Lemire is one of the best, or at least one of the most interesting creators when it comes to ending an initial story arc, because I think oftentimes he's good at not pulling the rug out from under the reader, but I think he's really good at getting to 5-6 issues in, and all of a sudden revealing to the reader, to the audience, that the story you thought you were reading isn't the one I'm actually telling you. Like, he's the one that can put a good twist at the end of a first volume, not a twist like a, like a huge crazy out of the blue twist, but like, oh wait, no, the thing you thought this was about isn't what it's actually about. And I think he does that well because he utilizes things like flashback. And again, when it is done well, when it's done, I don't want to say properly, but I'll use that, when it's done effectively,
Right.
you can get away with that, and you don't recognize the seams of the storytelling as much, because you just accept it and keep reading. Here, I think because we're stopping and talking about it, and we're analyzing it much deeper than it probably,
perhaps ad nauseum. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The seams are much clearer. But like I said, when I remember when I first read the story, because I read the first 18 issues, the first 3 volumes all at once, or first 16 issues, sorry, all at once. I didn't think anything of it, because I read them all at once, and then I knew, okay, well, this is what the story is. And I didn't think about the fact that where we left the story at the end of volume 2, by the time of volume 3, because I read them all at once, where the story is at the end of volume 3 is only marginally further than where the story was at the end of volume 2.
That was, so that was my biggest nitpick that I have in all caps, is like, how is this Tim fight still happening and yet not happening?
Yes. Nothing,
it never really happens. Like, you don't watch a big throwdown.
No,
but
it's more of a chase. It's more of a chase,
right?
Sequence,
for like 6-7 issues, you're tracking it with just like, hey, remember this is going on? We're gonna show it to you soon.
Well, and also, but I mean, like, when we go to like,
by the way, it's the back cover of volume 3 is Tim 21 hiding from Tim 22 hunting him.
Yeah.
It really gives a different impression of what's in this volume.
Yeah. I mean,
that
happens.
If this were,
that's what I was going to say. Like, I mean, some of the backstories. I mean, Driller, Effie and Andy, and Bandit. I mean, those are stories that are happening. Obviously, they're happening concurrently. Over on the planet with all the between. Where they're hiding out from the Nishians. So like, we don't even get updates on those stories, on the Tims and what's happening on the Machine Moon, what's happening with Telsa and Quan. So yeah, you only get just, again, a fraction of increase in the story. But again, when you read it all together, and then you can go directly into volume 4. And I think what's interesting is, for me, the first volume of volume 4, issue 17, I think maybe my favorite issue of the series.
It's really, really good. Yeah.
Because, I mean, I love a silent issue or a mostly silent issue. So there's that construction. The idea of what I'll call the parallel story arc telling. Of course, in this way, there's 3 stories they're telling concurrently. And the way that it's done on every page, right? Every page, the page is broken into thirds, and you're following the story along. You're following 3 pairs of stories. You have the Tims, obviously they're fighting. You have Andy and Effie, and you have Quan and Telsa. And in each page, you're seeing the story progress. And there is, funny too, I like at some point, one of the pages ends with Tim 21, like, activate silent mode. And then you turn the page, and then for the next like handful of pages, it is silent. There's no words across all the stories.
Yeah,
that was kind of clever, and hilarious. But again, this idea that you on each page, you're seeing all 3 of these stories here, and you're getting a different emotion and different feeling out of each one of them. With the Tims, you have your perspective is Tim 21. So there's fear. Right, as he's running and he's trying to hide from Tim 22. There's fear and anxiety there. There is with Andy and Effie, obviously there's passion and lust. There's a very strong there's a reconnection there. With Quan and Telsa, as they're trying to like escape from the dungeon or whatever, from the brig on the Machine Moon, there's anxiety and tension there, as they're trying to sneak through. and make their way out. So on on every page, you're getting a little bit of each of those stories, and you're getting all these emotions as you go through. And again, I love a silent issue, a mostly silent issue. It's one of those unique aspects of sequential art storytelling.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Is like you can't adapt this to anything
in the same way.
Even right. Because like even if you were making a cartoon version of this, you would not split the screen that direction because it's a different orientation.
Exactly.
And it's like, you could chop it, vertically, like Ang Lee Hulk type thing, but it's like that just doesn't work. This is a comic medium thing used to like the utmost, and it's just
absolutely
it's just perfect. And so that was one of my notes as well, that I just absolutely adored that. And then it reminded me of someone who did this but combined this with Lemire's flashbacks, which like these are kind of Lemirian tropes. I'm trying to remember the name of the book. Is a Matt Kent book, Matt and Charlene Kent, Pandemic, Underwater, Department H.
Department H. Mm-hmm.
Did you ever read Department H?
Yes. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So on the same page, it will be tracking the main character, her origin story and her real-time experience, but the narration bubbles, she will be hearing the flashback dialogue in the real-time one. And then the real-time dialogue will be happening at the bottom of the page in the flashback dialogue.
Yeah.
And you just move through like that, and you're like, this is genius scripting.
That's high level storytelling juggling there. Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah.
For kind of an unheralded comic.
Department H is a good book. Yeah. But no, I wasn't thinking in terms of the flashback. What I was thinking of in terms of something that you and I have talked about is going back to Paper Girls. The idea of, late in that series when our four main characters are all separated, and there's an issue where each four of the main girls are separated, and you get the same action. What do BKV and Cliff Chang do there is that each page, the page is divided into fourths now, and you see each one of the girls where they are, and you're tracking their story across the whole issue, page by page, quarter of a page at a time, in the same way that we have our story split now just three ways. But I love that kind of construction, because you're right, it's one of those things that you can't adapt one to one. It doesn't work that way, because the paneling, it's not paneled in a way, it is, you're watching basically separate screens almost. It isn't like we have insert panels and you can zoom in on something. You can't put that page on the screen. If you're adapting it in that way, you have to make big swing choices. And obviously, if something like that were to get adapted and that specific story, that issue, I would want the people doing it to take a big swing and not be like, we're going to replicate the comic or we're going to try to replicate these pages, because you can't do it. You can't do that simultaneous storytelling. And so seeing it work so well in issue 17 here.
I do have to say two things. One, as much credit as we give to like BKV and Jeff Lemire, respectively, those are Cliff Chang and Dustin Nguyen, masterworks. Well, issue 17 here, it's like, it's a great idea you had here, Jeff, but if Dustin doesn't pull it off, if Dustin doesn't see it, the whole thing flops.
Well, yes.
I think this is where,
but once again, it's not like he's handed an empty script here.
No. Yeah, there's clear action in each panel.
Yeah.
But it has to be,
these are collaborative processes.
Right. It has to be just enough that you can be detailed in terms of what's happening, but you can't have it be so detailed that it really needed the full page to see everything happening. So it's like a very specific frame or window you're looking at for each story.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm just blown away by it. But secondly,
and your mind connects. You have to know from page to page. We're not seeing the exact next moment. We're seeing a few moments after. And there is an understanding of how the reader is going to absorb the story, what they're going to fill in between the panels, between the pages of, we understand how characters get from here to here, and all we're seeing is effectively two panels for each of these stories. So yeah, there's an understanding of how to tell story there.
Yeah. I mean, and something that made me deeply sad when we did Paper Girls on the podcast, my wife was like, not a comic reader, but yeah, I'll do it. I'll read Paper Girls. I'll listen to the podcast. And she liked it, didn't love it, found it difficult to read. And I do think Paper Girls is probably a tougher entry point than I realized
it was. Not the easiest. Yeah, not the easiest.
And when she got to that issue, I think in volume 6, where you're tracking four stories per page, she was like,
it is 6. Yeah, it is. I thought it might have been volume 5. Yeah, I think you're right. It is the very
I think it's like
volume.
The penultimate issue or something. But
you're right. It's pretty close to it. Yeah.
She was like, I literally can't wrap my mind around this. I was like, well, stop reading at like your literature reading pace. Like, you have to slow down and take time with this and chew on it, because this is heftier than the things that preceded it or follow it. And you have to, I think she didn't rely on the art, and I think she didn't enjoy that experience.
I was going to say, I as someone, because your wife hasn't read a lot of comics, was she not able to rely on just the art and just?
Right, I think she was trying to like say, I'll glimpse at the art and I'll read the words.
Yeah, because it probably feels secondary to her, right? And that's
yes.
on your wife.
No. Yeah. I think that's a perfect description of it.
Yeah,
and I think that was, and when I started coming to comics, that was something that like really I got hung up on, was like, I'm a binger in terms of like reading.
Yeah. And
I was trying to binge comics. I was like, I read all of the words. I got nothing out of that. What's wrong with me? And I think it was, I could point to a few specific moments, but it was when I was reading an ongoing series and they would sub an artist. That's when I would have to pause and notice the art.
Yeah.
And one of the big tectonic shifts for me that came a little later in the game was Batman number 44, where the art was done by Jock, and this is in the New 52.
Yeah.
It was the police brutality one.
Yeah.
That came out after Ferguson. And Jock's art,
that's almost like a one-shot break, because it narratively in the story, it Batman isn't Batman at that point. Like Batman in spoilers for New 52 Batman. Yeah, that is kind of it was almost like a quote unquote very special edition. But yeah, that's a great
but
issue.
After reading, if we ever do like we need a filler week of this podcast and we just pull favorite single issues of all time, which would be an absolute blast to do. That would be on my list. But having read so far with Capullo's art, and then you don't know what you're getting. You just walk into the comic shop, you pick up the next issue, you open it, and it's Jock's art. All of a sudden, it's like, I can't just words on page. Like, I have to notice something different here. And so I think then it was like, I think I am actually processing more of the visual medium than I realized. Now I need to be more intentional about it. And I would say that cut my reading speed in half for comics. But it moved my comprehension depth and enjoyment up exponentially.
100%. Yeah, I think that is often
it's embarrassing for me that it came so late, because I think you can date that book to 2016 or something.
No. Well, no, in real time 44 would have come out like 2014 and 2015, something like that. So
I was thinking it was like right after Ferguson, Missouri.
Well, no, because
as November 2015. And I think Ferguson was August 2015.
All right.
So, I mean, I think
it would have been written around the same time.
Super fresh. Yeah.
But no, I think that's what we're talking about here, about the idea of using the art and relying on the art to help tell the story for new or newish readers to comics. I think that idea is a hurdle, or at least a perceived hurdle, as to why some people don't want to get into it, because they are used to just reading the words. And I think there's a perception about comics like that when people talk about comics, and they will talk about like Jeff Lemire's Descender,
right.
As opposed to, and of course, if you go to Jeff Lemire and say that, or any writer of comics, they will get angry on behalf of the artist and their co-creator.
I think like that is something that I have picked up from you, because when we first started this podcast, I kept saying Paper Girls by Brian K. Vaughan, and you were like, Brian K. Vaughan and Cliff Chiang. And I was like, Alex is being pedantic. And then I was like, oh no, he's really not. Well, if you look at the cover, that's how they want you to say it.
Yes. And that is the thing when this happens a lot with people who engage with
well, even if you use Goodreads, right? It lists the author. It doesn't say Paper Girls by Cliff Chiang.
Exactly. And especially when you engage with conversations and pockets of fandom that are comic related, comic adjacent, but maybe not actually in the comic sphere. When they talk about comics, it's always just the writer. It is Matt Fraction's Hawkeye. It's Tom King's Supergirl. It's things like that. And it's like, and if you go to, I said, you go to any comic writer and you just say that it's their book. Most artists won't come up and smack you for it, but every single writer will correct you because they feel they feel offended on behalf of their co-creator. And it is something that, it does drive me nuts. And I always correct people when I see it, especially when I see it written. People talk about, hey, recommend some comics or something like that, and they just list the writer. And I do feel like I'm being kind of a pedantic jerk, but at the same time, it's like, no, I actually think this is like incredibly important. And especially when you look at something like, you were kind of half joking, but maybe you're kind of half serious. I don't know. We talk about our favorite single issues at Sunday, which I think now that you said it into the universe, we should definitely do that.
I think that might be our end of year episode this year.
Maybe it will be. And I laugh about that because so many of mine would be silent and or mostly silent issues. Like some of my favorite single issues of all time are considered silent issues because because as I mentioned, that's a unique storytelling aspect of sequential art storytelling. This idea
can you imagine if like a 60-minute drama on TV just one week did a silent episode? Well, I mean, it could be done beautifully.
Here's the thing.
No one has the guts.
You could totally do that, but it is still different when you are watching motion pictures and you are seeing the action happen versus what comics often rely on, which is static image and some sort of narration, whether it's a character talking, a narration box, whatever it is. There's something there to help reinforce the action that's supposedly happening in this still image. There are other things, there are other clues that lead you to help your mind fill in what's happening on the page, from page to page and panel to panel. When you don't have that and it's just the art, and when it works, I think it's beautiful. I think it's incredible. I think that's the highest level of what sequential art storytelling is, when the story works without any words, any dialogue. Well, and sometimes not even sound effects. To me, that's the pinnacle. That's the pinnacle when creators are working so well that they both have an understanding of what the story needs to be, that the only thing you need to see is the art. And I can understand how someone who is not familiar with comics or as familiar with comics will look at that, flip through it probably in like a minute and a half and be like, okay, that was great. I don't get it. Like, I didn't read anything, or because they're not used to relying on the art for the story. They're used to relying on words and words alone. Someone, no offense, like your
wants
wife.
To challenge. Yeah, right. Yeah. No, the book I would never give her, and the book that I find very challenging is Step by Bloody Step, which is the silent series.
Yes.
Not just a silent issue. The whole series is silent. And
I think it has sound effects, though. I think it has sound effects.
Yeah.
I think back, but that's
but no narration, no dialogue, no character names.
Yes.
Which I remember saying, like, I would love to do this, but I actually don't know anything to say about it.
Yeah,
and I don't even know how to refer to the characters because they don't have names.
It'd be child,
girl, robot, or knight.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. But no, that's a great. That's a great. The fact that someone would try and do a series like that, Step by Bloody Step, is like that, and that is something that, you have to, your mind has to be right for that, to understand and be ready for that kind of story delivery mechanism,
right. I mean, so yeah, and I may have just committed the cardinal sin there. But I have talked to people who refer to it as Cy Spurrier's Step by Bloody Step. I'm
Yes,
like
yes.
you literally don't interact with directly with anything he wrote. Like Lemire in Descender, you're interacting with his dialogue that he wrote, and
Yeah.
Nguyen is depicting it. Uh, Everything in Step by Bloody Step is the depiction.
Yeah, yeah.
Whether it's the letterer or the artist, which is I think is Mateus Bergara. Is that
Yeah,
how you say the name?
yeah, but I believe it's pronounced that way.
Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
but yeah, no, it is, and so
so anyway, I didn't want to mention that without mentioning the artist and commit the
yeah,
very thing that we were just
yeah,
railing
yeah.
against.
Well, I mean, yeah, if you, I mean, you can look at Step by Bloody Step, you can find it there. But yeah, but if you had just said Cy Spurrier's Step by Bloody Step, um, that's when there's this idea of like, well, the artist is secondary, and I think people again who come from prose storytelling think of it that way, you know,
Right.
and that just it isn't the case there. And I think that first issue of volume 4 here, issue 17, it is that it's that at its peak. And so, you know, for me coming out of volume 3, which again, I love the backstories. I loved all of those backstories, even though I could understand again, if I were reading it in real time, um, I know and I can identify the frustration I would have had as a reader. Um, you know, it would have been not an issue for me, but it would have been like, okay, noted, like don't do this again. Like, you know, maybe you get one free pass to tread water on the story a little bit. But I would have felt like I love this backstory, but I don't know if I really needed it now. And it's kind of like I got the series on notice, and then boom, issue 17 is there. And it's constructed and told the way that it is, and like I'm back, you know,
Yeah.
I'm back in the story, even though we get to if we were to jump into the actual story that's being told here, like we've dipped back into the idea that like Tim 21 fake out death number like 3
Yeah. Yeah.
here, you know, how many times can Tim die but not die? And I get he's a robot, whatever, but still
Right.
robots can die.
No. But
Yeah.
like, wouldn't you think all of that communicates he's the main story? You know, the cover image
Yes.
for the first issue.
Yeah.
You know, following Tim all this time,
Yeah.
all the fake outs with him. Wouldn't you think he'd get like a little bit more screen time? Frankly,
This is true. Yeah.
he
Yeah.
probably is in fewer than 50% of the pages.
Well, and I do think it is interesting in that not that I had actually I had a note about this actually last week. We didn't quite cover it, but it's still relevant here. It's actually probably more relevant now that I think about it, because of what we saw in volume 3, which maybe, you know, that skews the percentages a little bit there. But Tim 21, he might be the least interesting character, and that's not actually a knock on the character there, but because he is the literal childlike empathetic like messiah figure, right? He is the one character that does not need to really grow or be on an arc, you know. Yes, he has this thing of like, wait, why, like, am I robot Jesus or whatever, and he's kind of dealing with that aspect there, but he is the one character that is like steadfast, you know, in terms of what we've seen, that he is not on a journey, he is not on an arc, and yet we see everyone else is. Andy obviously is trying to reconcile with his past, both with Andy as a scrapper, what happened to his mom, with Effie. Obviously, we see him and Effie being there in terms of that kind of bridges the gap between what humans and robots, how they deal with each other. Obviously, we have what's going on with Telsa, her relationship to the Harvesters, which cost her mother, her relationship to the UGC and her father. Driller obviously is on this quest of redemption through years of just like self-loathing and hatred. You know, we have Tim 22 who has a mission, but he sees in Tim 21 a counterpart, and he's still obviously an antagonist towards that, but he like recognizes the differences, while Tim 21 looks at Tim 22 and is just like, friend, you know, not really seeing that there is a big difference there. So everyone else has an arc or a potential arc set up somewhere they can go. And Tim 21 really doesn't. He is the one kind of rock. And so, yeah, while he is essentially the main character, and obviously he's the focal point, he's the thing everyone's trying to get to, but I think it's because everyone's trying to get to Tim for a different reason. UGC wants his code, or everyone kind of wants his base code because that can unlock the harvesters or whatnot. And some other, like Andy, just wants to get to Tim. And we're not even certain why. Andy hasn't even expressed an idea why.
In fact, there's a little bit of conflict in why, like what he's telling Effie.
Yes,
is not what we assumed when he perked up at hearing Tim. On that move before.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying. It is unclear now what his actual reasons are. We can guess that
he's just a repressed nut. And
and that he he's not actually out to find Tim and destroy him because he's a robot. That's actually, I think we're safe to say that's not going to happen. It's not his actual intention. But the fact that we saw his reaction back in volume 2, and the fact that how quickly he was like, yeah, I'll take that job. I'm going. I don't care that I'm only half fueled up. He's got to go. And the lengths he's already gone to find Tim. And then here, when him and Effie have that talk, you're right. He's like, I'm going to find it and kill it. It's just another robot. And the fact that he also, in that moment, in that talk, refers to Tim as it, not he.
Right.
Because that's what Effie obviously would do. Her having,
Right. But earlier in the series, he didn't say it was my brother.
Yes. And of course we see him. We know his interaction with Tim as children. Like this actually was his brother. There was a genuine connection there, and so yeah, we don't even know what his motivation is, or to his true motivation in finding Tim, and we don't know how it's going to react and how that's going to affect the story when we get there. So yeah, Tim is just he's this totem that everyone's trying to get to. So there is, so when I call him the least interesting character, it's just that he's the thing that everyone is searching for and revolving around. But Tim himself isn't much of a character, and so spending time with Tim isn't that interesting. What's interesting is Tim and someone else, right? Tim interacting with Dr. Kwan.
Because Tim's a mirror with Telsa. That you hold up to every character.
Yes. Yeah. And so, now it's Tim on the Rebel Moon, right? On the Machine Moon,
Well, that's a different comp than the one I made last time.
Yes, it is. Yeah. But again, so Tim by himself, he's only interesting in so much as you're right. What he brings out, what he shows with the characters that he's interacting with. You're right. He is a mirror. So the fact that he's not in the book as much, and the fact that you can have interesting pairings of other characters, like we see. I mean, Quan and Telsa being forced to be together, and then you throw in the disguised Tim 22. Obviously Andy and Effie, their history there. We end this volume with we end this volume with all of our characters in different places, as we kind of started now, except we also now we got to keep track of Driller, who's on his own on some random forest planet,
with a mention of magic in the woods there. And I was like, I did not remember this.
I'm with you there. There's this other aspect of the world that's starting to get explored. Something to keep in mind there's a larger world there.
In a spoiler free way, it made me excited for the rest of the podcast. Because I was like, oh wow, and he could be a crazy old kook. We don't know whether we believe him or not. Driller's certainly not going to be someone inclined to believe in magic. Speaking of the Guardians comp, though, did anything else jump out at you in this one, or is it all the same beats? Because there was one moment for me that felt it felt like so my favorite moment in the first Guardians movie is when they're raiding the ship at the end. They're getting beat down a little bit, and Groot steps up, extends his arm through a whole line of people, swings them back and forth, and a man is screaming. and then bounce him up and down, and then slams him down to the ground, and then turns around with like a big innocent
and smiles.
smile,
Yeah.
like like, did I do good? Yeah. And that was what I thought of when what they think is Tim 21 just levels a whole hallway full of guys. There.
Oh yeah, the action beat where he's flipping over guys, and you see the hand lasers coming.
I was like, that was his Groot. Did I do it?
Yeah.
And I bought it because I forgot about the Switch.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought Tim 21 had been pushed and activated his that's the other side of empathy, right?
Instant kill mode. Yeah.
Right. And there are books written on empathy, and people will tell you like the kid with the most empathy on the playground is the bully.
Mm-hmm.
The one who knows how to exact a very specific kind of pain
sure.
has the best ability to read people. They're just not using that.
They just can't access it on the other side. Right.
And so there are all these people in society that talk about how everyone needs more empathy. I'm like, empathy by itself, it's like we need empathy plus character, because
needs to be focused in the right way. It needs to be turned in the right direction here. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, that is a great scene there, because it does. That is one where you see it is plausible in that case of them. You see how they could have easily bought that was Tim 21.
Yes. That
the idea of especially when he first comes down and he's like, I didn't mean to do it. He pushed me to the edge. This idea, and I think what's interesting to the reader and what they set up was way back in the first issue when Tim is walking, when he wakes up and Tim is walking around the abandoned moon base, the drill base, and Bandit comes up to him. There is a half-page spread of Tim, and what do we see? We see his weapons activated because he's startled.
Right.
We don't see him do anything, but we know that he has that in the bag. That the whatever his hand opens up and it's got like the Iron Man repulsor ray. It's got the needles and all that, to the point where also like his face opens up, kind of like the Borg or whatever. So we see that was an instant reaction out of fear. And again, that's for the reader. We see that because he's only interacting with Bandit, but we see that in that moment of kind of the fight or flight right there. Tim is obviously scared, but his programming or whatever it is results in him basically arming up. And so when we cut back to the story of him being pursued by Tim 22, and we know that Tim 22 wants to cause him harm, we're already primed as readers to accept the idea that even though we know Tim 21 to be this highly compassionate, empathetic, caring companion robot, we know that he's got that capability. This idea that he has this weapon system, that he has this, that he can react in a certain way. It doesn't come out of the blue, whether you remember that early on or not. Again, the reader is primed. They've put that in the back of your mind. So yeah, it's totally believable that when pushed to a life or death situation, and also a situation where your choice is to protect the people you're with or not, that this robot could end up being a killer robot, as it were, under the guise of protection. Right. You're set up to believe that.
Yeah. I totally bit on all the fakes here, even on a reread.
So I'm curious, when did you remember? Did you remember when the reveal happened?
Yeah, when the reveal happened.
Okay.
Because and they don't draw it out forever. Like they could have easily let us go for a trade.
Which I don't know about you. I'm glad about that. I did remember. I did not remember the switch initially. I remembered it actually maybe like a page before.
You remembered it just in time. Yeah.
Yeah. So when is it Pius, the leader of the Hardwire?
Yeah, they call him Pius. I was doing a silent P. Yeah.
Sias. Okay,
in my head.
Yeah, maybe it was. But when he's looking down initially and he sees the body of what he thinks is Tim 22 before the reveal, which is like 2 pages later, and that's when they're like send the armada after them or whatever. It was in that moment, right before I was like, oh wait, they switched places, didn't they? And then like a page later, it was there. But I am glad personally I don't know about you, that they don't drag it out, that they don't make this that reveal wasn't the end of the reveal to the audience. But
right. It's not just that I'm glad. Yeah. I have a very specific reason I'm glad, because it feels like after volume 3, it's like, oh, maybe your idea for this series was a little thinner than you realized, and you're stretching it out.
Yeah.
Right. But then when you have a gem like that and you just burn it right away, you're like, oh no, he's going somewhere. Like he knows what he's doing. All of this pacing is intentional.
That's a good point. Point.
And that's one of those things. To me, it was very Lemirian, because it's like a lesser writer would have said, I've got this great twist with Tim 21, Tim 22. How long can I, how long can I? It's like, I don't know.
Well, no,
it's like what I'm worried the MCU is going to do with Skrulls now. It's like,
Well, no, it's because you haven't watched the. No, they're done with Skrulls. You don't need to watch Secret Invasion, but trust me, they're done with Skrulls.
I did watch it.
No, did you? Okay, well, they're done with Skrulls. They're not going back to that well. But no, I think you're right there, because I didn't think about the pacing aspect of it in terms of, again, using that word intentionality, to go back to that again, because the idea of you could so easily, because it's not about when they reveal this to the characters in the story. It's about when they string along the audience.
Right.
There's two reveals there, and you could so easily string along the audience for a story arc, and then the reveal to the audience that they've switched places, and then the next story arc is the story arc we get, that we actually are shown, which is the slow reveal to the characters. Right. Where it ends with Telsa and Quan learning that they're actually with Tim 20. You're right there. There is a sense of, I have this thing that thinks that you could see as this is a big card. This is a big chip to play, and I'm throwing it out right now, because maybe it's not as big. Yeah, because maybe it's not as big as you think it is, because I got something bigger coming. That's an interesting way to think about it. I saw it as just we don't want to string people along. That it almost felt like that the two of them maybe felt it would be too trite or too hackneyed to do the doppelganger thing and string it along for so long. Maybe they felt
maybe it would have been, yeah.
It maybe would have been. Well, I think the way you and I are talking about it, if they had kept the reader in the dark for a whole arc, and then they reveal it, you would look back on it and be like, well, damn it, what did we just read?
Right. It would ruin rereads, but also you would have to keep the real Tim 21 unconscious.
Yes.
For as long as you want the reveal, because he's not concealing anything.
That's true. That's true.
So
yeah.
You would take ostensibly your main character,
and he'd have to
out
be
of
dead.
the story. Right.
Yeah. He'd have to be dead. Yeah.
Or in like a robot coma.
Or
we found him. And again, they could have left him like that for a while and done this trick, but it was like, no. We got bigger and better places to go.
That is a thing of like, and maybe the robots wouldn't do that on the machine moon, but the idea of like, apparently you can just like turn them off.
Yeah,
like you can shut them down.
A little off switch.
Yeah, like.
Look. It's like it. It reminds me of like The Office season 2. When their old boss dies, Ed Truck, and Michael's talking about building a statue to him, and Dwight is suggesting that it become this animatronic thing, but only give it a 6-foot cord in case it turns on us. I'm like, someone should have given like, okay, here's the new Tim model, 6-foot cord.
Yeah, but the idea of like what this robot, whether you perceive the robot as human or human-like or whatever it is, the point is to take this robot and deliver it to somebody. Whether everybody wants this robot, everybody wants Tim, so why can't we just shut him down? Because apparently you can do that. It raises a couple questions there of well, there are some logic head scratchers here. So it's like there are.
Let's talk about Driller.
Sure.
He's given human language, but not really. He's like broken. I'm like, I don't understand. Like, someone had to sit down and program a slurred version of English for this bot, or that and like one of the my friends on Goodreads was saying, like, I'm not really sure why in this universe they decided, okay, here's a huge like machine that's drilling, let's give it AI. Like, how is that a good idea that could like turn and kill humans? Because in my head canon, I'm still drifting off of our reading of Pluto, probably because I'm also watching it on Netflix right now. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, robots don't kill people. And it's like, no, that's actually the whole thing that happened in this world. Like, robots absolutely can kill people.
And I'm thinking about it in terms of Asimov, if I Robot, the idea of the three laws of robotics we talked about with Pluto as well, but the idea that in some science fictions, the idea of robotics, that there are principles that are hardwired into their software, that
right.
They can only function with these ideas. Without these concepts, robotics can't even exist. And obviously in Descender, we don't have that in this world. The thing that I thought was funny, though, actually, about, you talked about someone went out of their way to give Driller, and we should also mention Scoops, the
Scoops,
the two robots that were on the plant, on the mining colony there. The idea that not only were they given some form of human speech, but like when they show up initially, when they first show up on the mining colony that Andy and his mom are at, like, they're sarcastic, like, yes, they understand sarcasm, and they're and to the point where the initial the whoever the one driller was the head of like their supervisor, I guess, like, calls them out for being sassy. Like, so we have these two industrial work robots that kind of have a level of human speech, but like, yeah, totally get sarcasm. And like, like, they're throwing one-liners and barbs out at that. And you think, well,
again, but can't pronounce human. It's like, that juxtaposition is, I hate that it bothers me. Like, I wish I could just switch off that part of my brain and be like, yeah, it just is what it is, and you just have to go with it for the story. But it seems like there's a fair bit of attention to detail for world building and things like that, apart from this one own goal. In terms of internal logic,
there is an idea, though. I think there is something to the effect of that is, I think, a question, a nitpick maybe across all of stories about robotics and AI specifically, is how much do we give over as humanity? How much have we given over to AI, to robotics, for all these functions? Because we talk about, and they talk about here in the story, like, I think back to the last volume when Dr. Kwan is talking to Sai, so he's talking to the hardwire, and he's like, he's trying to needle him, right? And he's like, I recognize your model. What were you? Were you a culinary robot? He's trying to pick him a little bit. So the idea that robots are designed with certain functions, obviously that's a staple of all these types of stories. And so you can always question, well, why do we give some of these robots AI? Like, if your job is to cook something, what do you need to think about it? If your job is to be culinary, can't you just say, I want this? And then can't they just access programming to make that? What is the need to give that robot a level of artificial intelligence, a level to think and reason and come to conclusions about things, when the point is for them to simply serve a function? And again, not trying to degrade robot kind. So if in the future and the robots have taken over, understand, I'm talking about fictional characters here, but it's the same idea when you're talking about Driller and Scoops. Their job ostensibly is for a function, right? Drill here, scoop here, dig this out. If the point of them is to just take direction, versus what Dr. Kwong created with the Tim series, that is meant to be an interactive, it's a companion series, so that's meant to learn and adapt and do things.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I'm like, why does he have speech at all? Why is he able to think and process it all? He should be just programmed to do this.
Exactly. It's that's a nitpick that I think goes across all stories about robots and AI and the potential perils of that for humanity, because the downfall of humanity when it comes to AI is always like, oh no, like we gave this small inconsequential robot AI. Well, why did we give the washing machine AI? Well, because we did, right? Because we could. And yet then it's your washing machine or your dishwasher that rises up against you, you know? And that's a nitpick that I think goes across stories about in this realm, in this genre. That I think is a fair criticism when you put a little bit of logic to it of like, well, why are we giving it's not so much about why do we have AI and why do we have robotics. It's like, why did we apply it to seemingly mundane task oriented, you know? It's like that's where the downfall of humanity comes from, that level of hubris, maybe, that we feel we can give these robots that sense of identity and purpose. So maybe we feel less bad about using them as just tools. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, now what I want is I want to tell the AI like appliances turning on people story, but from the Flintstones.
Yeah.
Where
the animal revolution.
Yeah.
The animal revolution.
But tell it as if it's an AI self-awareness awakening story. I would only trust Mark Russell with it, but
actually, you know what? Weirdly, they're not appliances, but if you want to read a story like that where the animals revolt, Animosity from Aftershock by Marguerite Bennett and Raphael Del Torre. It's a story about.
I've heard of it. I've never read it.
Yeah, side tangent here. Great read, fun read, especially maybe, I don't know if you like animals or not, or pets or whatnot. Maybe it's a horror story in that way. But
let me just tell you. Let me clue you off real quick. The thing I'm most excited for the rest of 2023. Now this is after Burroughs' wrist injury. Yeah. The thing I'm most excited for the rest of 2023 is Tom King and Peter Gross doing their
Animal
version
Pound.
of Animal Farm. In the Animal Pound.
Yeah.
Unless Tom King kills a cat. The Unforgivable. I emailed Peter Gross. And I said about something else for the podcast, but I also said, I'm super looking forward to this book. Please don't kill a cat.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Tom King is a dog guy. So, but I guess, you know, yeah. But so the idea of
it's going to be a dog being really sad about a cat that he killed once.
Maybe it could be that. But sorry, going back real quick, Animosity is about in that world, every single animal at the same moment is gifted or is granted full sentience and communication skills and reasoning level as a human. Every single animal. So like insect, reptile, mammal, everything on Earth, every animal on Earth is all of a sudden given full human level sentience and reasoning, communication skills. They can talk and do all these things. And what does that do to the world? Because now, as there may be 8 billion people on the planet, but there are a lot more animals out there. So what do you do for society? So you're talking about what the AI revolution would be, robot revolution, you know, rising up. That is kind of what the animal revolution would be. So Animosity from Aftershock. It's a very, very good series. It's a fun series. It's in Marguerite Bennett, Raphael Del Torre. So anyway, back to Descender and back to robots.
Rico. Yeah, well, I mean, I've chewed through most of what I had to say about this stint of Descender.
Yeah,
especially without getting any further ahead, because I did in my reread. I just kept going. I was like,
well, again, if you're going to the deluxe reading, it's easy to keep going.
It's out of my way to stop reading.
Yeah, actually, you know, one thing I do have here, if we don't have any other big notes, I had a couple of small things here that I thought was interesting, that I couldn't help but kind of clock as I went through, which were some references to other sci-fi works. Like visual references. I missed
those. Oh, okay.
Well, so like you know, in volume 4, when Andy and Effie and all them, when they're leaving after the Nishans have basically wiped out Effie's people, when they were in hiding there trying to access Bandit's memory bank there, as they're leaving, like a giant sandworm comes out like
Very
Tullus
Dune.
stop. Yeah, it's very Doom. Shai Hulud, the great sandworm. You can't help but think that when I see it. And I'm not saying it feels like an intentional I mean, any kind of sci-fi story, alien planet world, giant worm comes out of the ground, like that's a Dune thing. That's a Frank Herbert thing. It just is. It can't help but not be. But the one that I got a kick out of, and I don't know how intentional this was. It feels like maybe it is, just given the ages of Lemire and Nguyen. But back in volume 3 in Telsa's story, as she is trying to work her way through the UGC Academy, but she's being stonewalled by her dad,
Right.
When she goes off world to like a sketchy planet to get a fake ID, and she has a meeting with someone.
Yep.
And the meeting is with like a guy who's in the stomach of another guy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I thought of Quado from Total Recall. Now, have you seen Total Recall?
I haven't.
See, I knew
It's like Total Recall, Top Gun. I'm building quite the list here to watch.
But the original, I'm talking the original, the Arnold Schwarzenegger,
I've seen a lot of Schwarzenegger, but it's spotty. Like I've actually for some reason I've seen Eraser, and I don't know.
Yeah, you've seen like the really bad ones. I've never seen actually the Colin Farrell remake one, but the character of Quato is that same idea, and when you see it in that original Total Recall film with the Schwarzenegger version, like it's super wild and it's totally out there. But when I see that there, and I see that character that Telsa goes to meet with to get her fake ID, I can't help but see the visual of that. Remembering the first time I saw Total Recall and seeing that character of Quado. It's an undeniable reference for me. It's something that my brain is always going to connect. And again, I don't know if that was a touch point for guys like Lemire and Nguyen, but like I feel like it probably could be.
It had to be, yeah.
It whether again how much intentionality went into that reference, because there's no real reason to do that. Like there's no reason why when Telsa is going to meet with this shady underground person, like all she has to do is meet with the shady underground person, someone that can get her a fake ID,
right?
That character in the end is inconsequential. What's important is the act. She's willing to break the law to get a new ID so she can enroll in the UGC Academy. Who she meets, again, doesn't even matter, to the point where we don't even actually have to see the meeting. All we need is the end result of her getting a false identity. So the fact that they went out of their way to show this character who's totally wild, who was unlike any other character we've seen elsewhere, again, that felt to me like a little total Recall Easter egg. So.
Yeah, well, and so I not the Easter egg, but just to tie that what you just said back to our previous conversation, that's the type of thing where if the whole story was told in sequential order and you had to watch a whole issue of her getting like a fake ID and meeting all these people in the underground, it'd be a total like nothing burger. Doing it in flashback, unless you fill in the gaps. But if you tried to tell that much story in a flashback time frame, but in real time, you'd be like, what is this author doing? Like, this is so sparse and so minimal, I can't connect with the character at all. But when it's a flashback, it's like, yeah. But like, we know where it ends up. We know who the character is already. So just give us the pieces we need to fill in the gaps.
We can do it in one issue. Yeah. I wonder if that was what the decision they made was, because as you mentioned, they had done flashbacks before with Andy and with Tim, but so they already had a structure. They had a presented structure for telling flashbacks. And I do wonder if there was a thought of, can we tell these characters flashbacks in the same way? Like, because they could have done that, right? They could have tried to keep advancing the story, but use the same issue structure, the alternating pages, the monochromatic work, the panel structure. They could have tried to do that for each one of these and still advance the story. But I wonder if that would have felt kind of unrelenting and kind of daunting, especially if it were like 5 issues in a row. And
it would have been really hard on Dustin, in my opinion.
It probably would have been. It'd have been very hard on the reader, I think. It would have been I don't want to say confusing, but it would have been relentless if it were 5 in a row. So I wonder if that was the kind of maybe a discussion they had when they talked about telling a flashback story, and maybe scrapping that pretty quickly, being like, no, that's not going to work. Let's just have each one of these be a full flashback, and then we'll just catch up with the story at the end, and we'll see how the flashback ties into where our characters are now and advance the story a little bit. It's like, but I think it's interesting that they had a flashback structure, and then when presented with multiple flashbacks with multiple characters, they were just kind of like, no, you know what? That's not going to work. That works with a one shot on a one off with one character in one volume, and then another character in another volume. But if we're doing a whole volume of them, that structure just isn't going to work. And that's probably a good idea, given what they ended up presenting and where the story ended up going. Probably good to not try and juggle all of those flashbacks while also advancing all of the stories throughout them.
Right. Yeah.
In the end, it probably was good that they just advanced the story a couple pages at the end, and eat the fact that it feels like they're treading water a little bit, versus trying to juggle all of that all at once.
Yeah. No, yeah. I think that had to be the conversation they had based on how we know they already established doing flashbacks.
Yeah. So the fact they would break and do something different, maybe they understood it. Just it wouldn't have worked for an extended number of flashbacks. Yeah.
Any other pop culture call outs? You had mentioned a couple there.
Yeah, no, those are the two big ones there. If there are any other ones, I think
the Dune thing, and I never read or watched Dune, but I know the Dune reference.
Well, yeah, the sandworm is one of those things. There's always someone. There's there's always some ones. There's always persons at a Comic-Con who go as a sandworm. That's almost a guarantee.
Right, and if the sandworm comes that far above ground, it's Dune. If it stays mostly, it's a pit of Sarlacc. If it stays below the surface, right?
Or it's Tremors, something like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
many options.
Yeah, there are a lot of options there, but yeah, no, those feel like kind of Easter egg nods to me in terms of other sci-fi stories, other sci-fi fantasy, whatever you want to call them, kind of worlds, and pulling those parts in there. That, or maybe they're just like fun things to draw.
Right. Well, any other thoughts on volumes 3 and 4, issues 12 through 21, or shall we wrap this one and get ready for
I think we should wrap
a big finale.
And get ready towards the end. And I think what is interesting to me that stands out, because I didn't remember all of the pacing here, is that we're 2/3 of the way through the story right now, right? And it seems like we talked about everyone is searching for Tim, right? Everyone wants to get to Tim, and we're 2/3 of the way through, and like no one is any closer to that. You would think like, oh, you want Andy to get there. Andy and Tim needs to reunite. Or what happens when he gets to UGC, or what happens when so-and-so no one's done that yet, and it seems like all of the objectives are still in the air, and we've only got 2 volumes left, so you in your mind, you're kind of ready for some kind of some big finale, that, or maybe the finale you're thinking of isn't the one that we're actually going to get as a reader, because it seems like you're being set up for something, and yet it seems like we're so far away from it. So maybe the story, the end you think you're heading towards, is not quite the one that you got, because it seems like there are so many disparate parts of the story. How do all these come together? I think that's the kind of mindset they want you to be in as you head towards the final 2 volumes here.
So I was closing my notes out, and I saw one last note.
Sure.
And this was an epiphany for me this time around. If you had asked me when I said, a couple months ago, let's do Descender, and you said, how long in the story, the real-time story, not counting the flashbacks, how long does the story take place over? I would have said, I don't know, a few months or a year or two. It feels more like it's only been about like 72 hours. so far.
It feels like from the moment Tim wakes up.
Right. From the moment Tim wakes up,
it's
how
probably
far
been like
out
a
do
week.
you think okay. Yeah.
It's
like
probably
a week.
been like
okay.
a week,
right.
a week, maybe 10 days at most. Yeah.
And there's no big, I don't recall a big time jump before the finale. So it's like this whole series wraps in about a week or two.
Yeah.
Of real time. It just feels so much longer because you keep jumping back 14 years and 10 years and 7 years and 6 years. And there's all these characters and all these places.
I think there's also the idea of, because we're talking about space travel now, you can obviously they have like, ways to get through space and all that. But the idea that there are some issues where characters are just on spaceships talking. And so because they're traveling, you feel like there's a time thing there, but going from planet to planet or moon to moon or whatever, we think.
Although when your primary mechanism for travel is going through wormholes, what is time?
Exactly. So the idea that they could travel, like, it literally might be like 4 hours for them to get from across the sides of the galaxy, but because they're in space and they're traveling, we have this sense that it takes a lot longer there. But no, I think it's taken. I think real time. It's probably been a handful of days. It hasn't been that long. We're not talking about months and months here. Tim has been reawoken. It's probably been about a week and change maybe since where we are now. So
yeah, okay,
that's about right. I think so, at least.
Yeah, no, I was tracking that pretty clearly in my opinion this time, but I did not remember it being such a compressed story.
Sure,
and it's a really tight narrative. Aside from. It feels so meandering the first time through because it's so expansive, but it's pretty tight
because of those flashbacks they give. It's all character stuff, but yeah, in terms of where the actual plot leads you, the narrative leads you, it's not much further. So yeah, what's actually happening in the through line of the current timeline, the current story. Yeah, there's not a lot of fat there. It's pretty efficient, but you are getting so much more about the characters because they're taking time to fill out these other characters, what their histories and motivations are. It feels more expansive. The world doesn't feel more expansive yet because we don't know much about the world and the setup of the government and whatnot, but our characters feel more expansive because we know so much more about them and their motivations in ways that we don't really understand how they could or could not affect the plot. Like, it doesn't matter to us. Like, does it really matter to the story why Tim 22 feels the way he does?
Right.
It ultimately not really, right? Because what we need to know is that he's part of this robot superiority cult and he stands in opposition to Tim 21. He's the evil twin version of Tim 21. Is it important to know why he is the way he is, why he was conditioned that way, because he was in a suffered at the hands of an abusive human? Is that super important to the overall narrative? Not really for the character of Tim 22. All we need to know is that he's the opposite of Tim 21, but we get that they took time to give us that. So
right,
it feels,
and implicitly you understand, like, there is a little bit of a balancing act for our Tim 21.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yeah. This is what he could have been. Yeah.
Right.
And again,
pushed in a different direction.
I love all this character backstory, but if you're asking me, is it essential to the narrative? Not so much. The narrative could be tighter, and you can just get this.
The narrative could be 12 issues.
Absolutely. Yeah. But because they're taking time to give you the character stuff, because they want you to invest in all these characters and have that be their gateway for expanding the universe to the whole world of the story they're telling. It does feel bigger than maybe the actual beat to beat, A to B to C to D story that they're telling of what's happening with Tim, who has Tim, who's after Tim. That is a pretty efficient, that's a pretty straight line.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Well, I'm super excited for I've already read volume 5, but I'm really excited to finish with volume 6. Yeah. And volume 4 got me really excited to reread Ascender, which I have never done.
I'm very excited. I think that little one-off there with Driller. Yeah. You're right. That gave me. I didn't remember that either. I didn't remember that little allusion to magic and the mention there. So yeah, there is a sense of I'm now very excited to finish Descender and go right into Ascender, and have that in mind, have it all fresh, and to see what that transition is like. I'm very much looking forward to wrapping this story as well, and getting to the end now, and getting to relive that. And you're right, going back into Ascender and seeing what the world is like there. So I'm very stoked to get to the to talk about the next couple of volumes here.
Yes. You can find the next couple of volumes at your public library, at your comic shop, at Barnes & Noble, at Amazon, basically everywhere. It's a big series. Grab 5 and 6, or the final issues is 22 through 30. 22 through
22 to 32.
Yeah,
22 to 32.
There's always a stumbling block for me.
Yeah. Well, it's because not everyone works in nice round numbers, or even does their story arcs in even issue breaks. So
looking at you, Brubaker and Phillips with Killer Be Killed, because that was like 5-4, 5-4, 5-4 or something.
Yeah, they do whatever they want there, but yeah, the 22 to 32, the last part of the deluxe edition, the last 2 trades, however you get it, it's the end of the story. Read to the end.
And follow us, as always, at storiedarcs.com. Our Linktree link is in this episode description. You can find all of our socials media there. And shout out to Blue Sky. We are active on there now, active-ish on there now. And lots of comic creators are active there. And we are getting some interactions with them. So if you're still using the company formerly known as Twitter, consider,
or any other
Blue
social
Sky.
media, and nothing against the other ones, but the comic creator community has kind of quasi decided that Blue Sky is a place that they're going.
They're at least all dipping their toe in.
Yes. They're the ones, like Mastodon or whatever that tried or whatnot. I don't think anyone's on Threads or anything like that. But if you want to follow,
no one's on Threads on
creators. Yeah, if you want to follow your favorite comic creators, and there are even comic creators on Blue Sky that had left Twitter years ago.
Yeah.
So it's like they're
like a family reunion.
In terms of rebuilding community, social media community, specifically for comic creators, it seems like Blue Sky is where they are migrating to. So yeah, find us there. We're still on the other ones as well. At Storied Arcs. Well, if you reach out to us, we'll find you. We'll find you out there at some point.
Yeah, and not to knock it, because the only place you can find Dustin Nguyen, our artist for this series, is Instagram. That is his only social, which seems appropriate for an artist.
For an artist,
that has the visual social media.
Yeah.
Anyway, longest wrap up ever. See you next week.
Yeah, peace.